Good morning, everyone who's joining the ASFPM conference. We're so excited to have you here on day one and first session of the conference for 2021. You are currently in session A1, which is for the CRS National Focus. I'm Michelle Gonzalez. I'll be the moderator for this session. I am currently serving as the Region 6 representative for ASFPM and also the chair-elect for the Louisiana Floodplain Management Association. So really excited to be with you guys here today and also excited for this CRS conversation. I work in a community that's currently a Class 5 CRS, saving over $10 million annually in flood insurance premiums. So where the future of this program is going and changes is important, and I'm excited to hear what our speakers have to say. We've got a great lineup of speakers. Before I introduce them, I wanted to remind all of the participants that there is a chat function where you will ask your questions. So please don't wait till the end. If you have a question as the presenters are going through, ask that question, and then I'll read those off at the end and let them answer for you. So our first presenters is Rachel Sears and Mary Jo Mullen. Rachel currently works with FEMA and is the director for the Flood Management Division. She plays a lead role in advancing FEMA's work in national climate adaptation and resilience policy. Over the course of her career, she's worked multiple disasters in National Operations Center and has been deployed for field assignments in Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Iowa. And like I mentioned earlier, she's joined today by Mary Jo Mullen, and we're just excited to see what they have to say with incentivizing the future of risk reduction in the CRS transformation.
Good morning. We're so happy to get the opportunity to talk to you today about the future of the Community Rating System, CRS. As you likely know, the CRS has a storied history with some of the best minds in floodplain management participating in the early design and the initial expansion of this important part of the National Flood Insurance Program. In 1994, Congress recognized the importance of the program as well and codified it into law, creating a program to provide incentives for measures that reduce the risk of flood and erosion damage. The program itself was actually created in 1990, but then it was first authorized, as I said before, in the NFIP Reform Act of 1994. In addition to that, the law, we've also done some changes within the program through the years. In 2008, we initiated a strategic planning effort. And this effort really laid out a 5-year strategic plan around activity improvements and program management. And it ultimately culminated in the 2013 updated CRS Coordinators Manual. The activities were closely looked at, but the overall program approach remained the same. We then updated the manual in 2017, where we added some additional activities. Again, tweaks around the scoring activities, but the approach remained steady. And then most recently, of course, we did a small addendum, the 2021 addendum to the published manual, the 2017 manual. In that, we really focused on 4 main activities: Class 8 residential freeboard prerequisite, attention to the NFIP's compliance with the Endangered Species Act and things that CRS communities could do to help advance those, attention to substantial damage enforcement, and additional credit for flood insurance promotion. Again, these were activities that helped enhance specific goals, but the overall CRS approach has remained consistent. So, as we think about the transformations overall in the National Flood Insurance Program, we have to ask ourselves then, what's next for CRS? So historically, we have made, as I said before, incremental changes and course corrections to improve the program, but ongoing feedback within FEMA and our external stakeholders have told us that there have been major changes in our understanding of flood risk reduction techniques themselves, and even the technology that we use to manage that flood risk. In addition, the overall NFIP is undergoing some major changes right now in terms of the rating methodology, as well as the future of flood risk data and the tools that are available to help us manage flood risk. And so with that, we have to ask ourselves then, what role does CRS have in these transformations, and what can we do in this program? So we have embarked on an effort to transform the community rating system. We've established a purpose statement saying that the community rating system's new purpose is to align with our improved understanding of flood risk and flood risk reduction approaches gained since the initiation of the program, to better incentivize communities and policyholders to become more resilient and lower their vulnerability to flood risk, recognizing that all of these activities support the sound financial framework of the NFIP. So as we think about the future of CRS, we know there are many opportunities for change and enhancements to the program, but we also know that there are so many good things about this program and so much that has worked well. So several of our foundational assumptions going into this effort is that we are going to hold on to the things that have worked well within the program. So these are our foundational assumptions. The first is that the CRS is going to continue to provide whole community public benefits through a rewards-based program. CRS is going to increase the visibility of comprehensive flood risk and recognition of those actions taken by communities. CRS is a badge of honor for communities and for professionals within the flood risk reduction community. We want to continue to promote visibility of those good actions taken by communities and recognize those communities that are going above and beyond. CRS will support and contribute to the financial soundness of the NFIP. CRS is an important means by which we buy down risk in this country, and it's an important way in which we continue to promote the financial soundness of the National Flood Insurance Fund. CRS will be simpler for communities to join and participate in. CRS will be simpler to communicate. That CRS does not address the structure-based risk reduction activities and avoids duplication between CRS and our rating approaches. So whereas our individual insurance rates recognize the individual characteristics of specific structures, CRS has and will continue to recognize the important activities that happen at a community level that we will give discounts for. And finally, that CRS is driven by a process and accountability with any exceptions managed, escalated, and documented. One of the great strengths of CRS is that it is a program that has a lot of documentation to it, and it's very transparent about what the requirements are, and that we are able to provide scores and give answers on the community status, and that there is process to all of that. So we want to continue to have a robust process that is transparent to communities, and expectations are clear on what's expected. So as we think about then, if those are the things that are holding solid, then what are the things that we believe can change within the program, things that we need to explore? We have labeled these as our guiding principle topics, the elements that from a policy perspective, the knobs you can turn or the levers you can move that change the program. So these are several that we have pre-identified as areas of exploration as we look at what's next for CRS. The first is enhancing the agility of CRS. Right now, CRS is managed through the CRS Coordinator's Manual. We changed that manual 3 to 5 years. So by and large, the CRS is very predictable. But on the other hand, it can be seen as slow to change. If the requirements only change every 3 to 5 years, then is it really agile? Does it really pick up innovations and recognize the latest good work? So there's a question about the degree to which CRS should be more agile, measurable. To what extent should CRS be about measurable and quantifiable benefits and risk reduction activities versus recognizing activities that may not have as much measurability and return on investment, but we know in our hearts have really good value? Simplifying. To what extent do we need to simplify FEMA's operation of CRS? Equitable. This is a very important topic right now. And CRS has been in these conversations for the last few years. To what degree is CRS truly accessible to communities and populations that have less need? So are we a fair and equitable community rating system? And is there more that we should be doing in this space? Customizable. To what extent should CRS be prescriptive versus customizable for communities? Incentivizing change. Should CRS be more about recognizing the activities and providing the discounts of things that are already going on? And to what extent should it be incentivizing continued growth and higher standards and pushing the boundaries of what's expected in terms of community risk reduction? Participation, growing participation in the community rating system. Should the community rating system be a program at what end that scores all communities on the degree to which they're going above and beyond the minimum standards, or should CRS be reserved for those communities that have the most robust risk reduction programs and are really the shining examples on the hill? So what is our goal in terms of communities that participate in the community rating system? Partnering with communities and states. To what extent should the CRS be incentivizing and driving partnerships among communities within watersheds, or the role of the state within flood risk reduction? Program benefits. So right now, the CRS program is based on community level participation with benefits being given to the individual policyholders. Should we be exploring authorities that would provide communities with rewards as well? Data and technology. To what extent do we incentivize leveraging the best data and technology within the program? So those are some of the areas that we've pre-identified as being areas of interest as we explore the future of the program. Here we have a very high level timeline of what this transformation looks like. You can see that we've got the little red arrow here that shows that we are still very much in phase one, which is our phase of data gathering, analytics, and early engagement. So this is part of the effort to begin to talk to you, the stakeholders, about what we have in mind for the future of the CRS effort. We will very soon be moving into collecting input and asking for your feedback as we begin this initial phase of looking at what are the program alternatives. You can see we will move into phase two, where we're looking at an analysis of alternatives. And then we will move into a framing stage where we begin to look at the existing program framework, alternative program frameworks, and begin to explore different models for how we implement CRS in the future. We then move into a implementation stage. We know that CRS is implemented by communities and that there are many, many external partners to this program. And so what we want to do is make sure that that we leave ample time for implementation, that we communicate what the changes are going to be, prepare for the new program, and then look at delivering the new program options. And that could take us into 23, 24, and even 25. So this is going to be a lengthy process. We're not planning on moving anything quickly. We want to engage you all through this process and be very mindful of when this eventually rolls out. And to that end, we have planned for an engagement cycle in each phase of this, where we gather input from both internal and external audiences. We bring that information inside of FEMA. We look at design. What are the different options actions based on what we heard, alignment, that we work across the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration at all of the various mitigation programs, even other FEMA programs, to look for opportunities for alignment. And then we present materials back out to you, the stakeholders, for your reaction. And then as we move into the next cycle, we do that same engagement. So your input is key to this effort. We recognize that the great activities that happen with CRS happen at the community level and are informed by you out there actually doing the work. So your input is absolutely invaluable. We need your input to be able to make the decisions about the future of this program. So we're going to be asking for your ideas and feedback throughout this process. We have already started having internal discussions across FEMA, framing some of the questions that we're going to ask. And we will very soon be moving into a phase where we start gathering external input, looking at you, communities, you in the states, the professional associations and organizations out there about what you want to see out of this program, and the general public. This is a program that heavily impacts the individual policyholders, so we very much want to hear from those customers as well. We really look forward to your questions, and thank you so much.
Definitely want to thank Rachel and Mary Jo for that informative presentation. We've had a few questions come in through the chat function, so I'll start with those, and if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to continue to populate those in the chat. So Rachel and Mary Jo, the first question that came in was, how does the community's local CRS coordinator stay up to date with this CRS change process?
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Michelle. That's such a great question. Part of this effort is very much focused on being deliberate about how we get input. It's very, very important to us to engage you along the way. We all know that nothing happens in CRS without the local coordinator. So we are intentionally creating multiple points along the way at different phases to engage local officials, most importantly, but then other stakeholders as well. As we said at the end, we're going to be hosting national webinars, so we encourage virtual participation. We're going to use a Federal Register process, which isn't always the most accessible process, but it will enable a way to submit comments. But we'll also be leveraging local user groups and going through our normal CRS communication channels. One of the great things about CRS is we have a really connected community of practice, and we're going to leverage the user groups and other associations that we have to reach out to you. And again, we'll be doing that throughout the process. We're very much at the beginning phase, the thinking, and we're in the coming weeks, we're going to be asking for your input there. But as we get into design, we're going to come back out again and say, we'd like your input on these various alternatives. And when we get to implementation, we're going to come back out again and say, what are the implementation challenges? So it's not going to be a one and done. We're going to reach out to you several times. Thanks for that question.
Can I just add one thing to that too? In the high level time frame slide, towards the end, you saw really long sections of preparing for the new program and delivering the new program. As we have the redesign of CRS set, we have a lot of time scheduled in there to be communicating what the changes are, working with communities through that process before any of it's actually live and happening. So it's at least a year, maybe two, that we're really going to be working through everything that needs to happen to deliver it and make sure that the transition is smooth also.
So we had two different questions come in that kind of ask about planning. The first one says, will changes and updates to the CRS program still be aligned with the requirements of multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation planning, specifically with points in Activity 500? And then the other one, with regards to CRS planning, will there be a requirement for communities to show steps in implementation for RL and mitigation plans to get full credit? So it's kind of asking about the alignment and then also the implementation.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that we're very much at the initial phases, so no decisions have been made about any specific program element yet. But what I will say, one of our primary goals in relooking at the program is that we emphasize alignment of other programs to really further our loss reduction goals across multiple mitigation programs. So I would say that alignment of things like planning would be very important in the future, as that's one of our primary goals. But again, we haven't, we're very much in the stage of figuring out what are the primary areas that we want to focus on. But alignment is a high priority as we move forward.
So as I've just kind of looked through the rest of the questions, there's several that kind of go with the timeline for this program rollout. And so maybe if you could just reiterate to us how quickly do you anticipate this to roll out, and kind of also what maybe a community official or a users group could do to make sure that they're getting the updates.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is very much a multi-year effort. We're looking at timeframes that extend into 2023, 2024, perhaps even 2025. So as we are going through this, no changes would be in place until those out years. We will be publishing again in the Federal Register that talks about what we're looking for in terms of inputs. We'll have webinars where we'll share with you what that time frame looks like and how you can get involved. But we will be looking for comments in the next couple of months. So start jotting down your ideas and thinking about what's important to you and what you want us to know. But again, as I said, this will not be a one and done. We will be reaching out to you many times. We wanted to use this platform as a way to start to notify everybody that we're looking at these changes, and to get you thinking about what's important for CRS for you as we move forward.
Certainly, I've just looked through a few of the other questions, and some of them are very site specific to individuals that live in certain jurisdictions. And so certainly those of you who are asking the questions, the questions will be provided to the speakers over the course of the conference, even if they're not fully answered today. So, as I just look at some of the other comments that we have, I think some of them may be answered through the other presentations we have, things like what's the latest edition of the CRS manual, and some questions about Addendum. And I know that our next presenters are going to definitely get more in the weeds with that. But let me ask one more quick one, because I see another one came in. It's about the EC requirements and kind of how things are changing with risk rating 2.0 and all of that. So if you guys just want to hit super high level about any EC stuff that you may want to mention.
Yeah, at this point, we have not made any changes to the existing CRS program. We can, as we look at CRS transformation, we can look at the role of ECs and what those mean for our program. But for now, nothing has changed in the CRS program, but risk rating 2.0 has changed what it means for the requirements for insurance. Elevation certificates remain an important tool for helping to collect elevation information to support the issuing of permits. So we still see the elevation certificate as a strong floodplain management tool. Risk rating 2.0 provides an option to have a rating that doesn't require the elevation certificate though. So complementary, but slightly different takes on the EC there.
Okay, so I certainly want to thank both Rachel and Mary Jo for the time that they spent preparing this presentation, recording it, being here with us this morning to answer questions from the audience. It's great to have you guys here presenting on, a future outlook. It's nice to know, something that might happen in 2024 is being talked about in 2021, that we're at the early stages and being informed and going to have ways to provide input. So thank you for your time today. Our next speakers are going to talk about specifically the CRS program updates and the 2021 addendum. So we've got some of the greatest people that I think have the information that we need. It's Bill Lesser, who is the National Coordinator for the NFIP CRS program. He coordinates the overall CRS operations with the 10 FEMA regions. We have Molly O'Toole, who's the lead consultant for the CRS program, and she's been involved in the program since 1991. And then we have Ms. Sherry Harper, who is the director for the National Hazards Program with CRS and has been with the Insurance Service Office, specifically working with CRS since 2003. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Bill and his co-presenters, and hope you guys enjoy this one.
Good morning, everyone. This is the Community Rating System Program Updates in 2021 Addendum session. Thank you, Michelle, for facilitating this session. We hope this is meaningful for all participants, and I look forward to a questions session at the conclusion of the formal presentations. Next session, there we go. My name is Bill Lesser. I'm with FEMA. I'm the FEMA CRS coordinator. Today, you'll also hear about the 2021 Addendum from Molly O'Toole, managing consultant to the CRS. And we'll also hear about community visits and training from Sherry Harper, the Director of Flood Mitigation for Insurance Services Office. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for attending this session. If we were together in person, this would be a lively encounter where we get to visit and talk face-to-face about your CRS program delivery experiences and learn from each other. Today, I'm going to highlight these topics. We'll talk about CRS Next just for a moment, and then I want to speak to how the CRS program delivers FEMA's core values, and spend a little time on some new emphasis on CRS foundations, and then share some new items relating to the program coming out in 2021. Regarding CRS Next, I do want to emphasize the importance of our desire to hear from our CRS coordinators across the nation. As Rachel and her team mentioned previously, we have a lot of plans to gather input from those of you that have been involved with CRS, and we welcome your input. There will be webinars and other opportunities for you to provide input through the CRS Next initiative, and I encourage you to take advantage of that. Next slide. I'm very pleased to celebrate that so much of the style with which we deliver the CRS program fits so well with FEMA's core values. Our values of compassion, fairness, integrity, and respect are core to how we strive to deliver the CRS program. I know that on a daily basis, I see examples of this in how we work with communities and work with each other. And I would say we're all involved with delivering the CRS program in this manner, both those of us from FEMA and ISO, as well as communities. I know so many of our CRS communities reflect these values in the way you work with your citizens, occupants of floodplains, and I just thank you for sharing in these values as we deliver the program. Next slide. Just a few points to touch on. NFIP compliance of CRS communities continues to be very important. Many of you know that when you join the CRS program, there's a eligibility determination that is made, and that expectation of CRS compliance continues with communities as they continue to participate in the CRS. The elevation certificate review is, of course, an important tool, if you will, or process to monitor community compliance. And we will hear more later from Molly about changes in that process. Again, this is the completion of the elevation certificates is important to monitoring community compliance and will get more attention in the future. Similarly, FEMA is developing new emphasis on monitoring post-disaster substantial damage compliance of communities, not just CRS communities, but all communities, and we'll be seeing more attention and focus in that area in the future. Regarding repetitive loss data, many of you that have been with the CRS program for years know that in the past, We would routinely provide claims information to CRS communities. Of course, that has changed. A lot of work has gone into improving a new process, and essentially the step a community would take to request repetitive loss data involves contacting your FEMA regional flood insurance liaison. And I know in the CRS update newsletter and through other avenues, you can get that contact information. Next slide. A few items quickly about what's new for 2021. We do have a new FEMA CRS webpage. That is now the source for the official list of CRS communities with their CRS classes. That list used to be in the insurance manual, but it is there no longer. There's actually a link in the manual to the webpage that has the list of CRS classes for CRS communities. We're also extending new emphasis on losses avoided in CRS communities. We have a losses avoided committee on the CRS task force, and we desperately would like to hear from CRS communities. For those of you that go through flooding events, it's very important to hear about losses avoided because of your CRS program best practices. Please take note of these and communicate with your ISO field specialist with information you may have about losses avoided. It's critical to be able to demonstrate the benefits of CRS programmatically, and I think there's more examples of losses avoided that would be useful to gather. Next slide. Now we'll hear from Molly O'Toole on the CRS 2021 Addendum. Thank you, Molly.
Very good. Thank you, Bill. And good morning to everyone as well. At last year's conference, we were talking about our plans for a 2021 addendum and told you we wouldn't be issuing a draft addendum and so on and so forth. And this year, we're happy to be at the conference saying that we have an effective 2021 addendum to the CRS program. So many of you are familiar, but for some of you who might not be, the current effective manual for the CRS program continues to be the 2017 manual. The cover says that it's expired by now, but it's continuing to be used until FEMA issues a new manual. And then in light of the NFIP transformation efforts, risk rating efforts, and other things happening within FEMA, we opted to not do a new manual about now, but instead do an addendum so we could ensure that the program captures some of the FEMA and FIMA priorities for increasing resilience and some of the other factors that Bill talked about. So we've released an addendum. The addendum is quite well organized, we think. The text box there shows that there's a good forward that explains how to use it. It's broken up by sections and explains a little bit about why the change and where to apply the changes within the addendum. It's available on the FEMA.gov/community system rating system website. Click on the link and scroll down. There is a couple of ways to link to the addendum manual itself. If one of those links is broken, click on the title or click in the paragraph and you should get there. And then that rectangle box, the blue box in the bottom of the red circle on your screen, is also some FAQs about the addendum to help you understand more or to share those with community officials if you're needing to approach them about making changes to your program to meet the requirements of the addendum. I do want to also point out that the website there, FEMA.gov/community-rating-system, is something called a vanity URL for our program. When you click on it, you actually end up at FEMA.gov/floodplain management/community-rating-system. And should our CRS page get moved somewhere else with FEMA.gov, this will remain our vanity URL or our most useful URL. So if you're needing to include this in publications to send people to FEMA.gov for the CRS, this is your shortened address. This is the address to use going forward. And it should always be successful in landing on the right page at FEMA.gov. Ideally, most of you have heard about our 2 new requirements that come out of the 2021 addendum. And because we have other training and other webinars that speak to these, I'll just touch on a couple of highlights for our 2 new requirements. And one is a changed Class 9 prerequisite for elevation certificates, and the other is a new Class 8 freeboard prerequisite for residential freeboard. For the Class 9 prerequisite, we're making kind of a change within the whole program to move away from saying elevation certificates and saying construction certificates. So the Class 9 prerequisite now says that construction certificates for all new buildings, substantially damaged, substantially improved construction within the SFHA are required to be submitted annually for review within the community rating system. Each year, then, you have to meet the current correctness rate, which is 90%. So each year we'll look to see that you meet those. And then you'll have 2 opportunities to be making corrections. So this is a change. Instead of turning in ECs at cycle time at a verification visit, we're going to take a look at them every year. And we've heard very good feedback. This is a good simplification to the program and allows you to make those changes when those construction projects have just completed and people are taking occupancy of those buildings. We're making this transition during 2021. So some communities may find that they're not turning in a year's worth of ECs. Other communities might be turning in more than a little bit year's worth this year. We have to pick a transition year, and this is our year. But the ISO CRS resource specialist will be in touch with you and help explain. But we're in May, so maybe some of you have already made the transition, and if so, fantastic. The other change that goes with the prerequisite is that instead of receiving elevation certificate credit in Activity 310 for your correctness rate of ECs, we're now requiring everyone as part of the prerequisite to have construction certificate management procedures. Many of you already have procedures. We may want you to look at those and make sure you hit all of the important 8 points that we're asking that are within those procedures. And then all communities will be getting 38 points in Activity 310 for that requirement and for having those procedures. So for some communities, this may not be an increase in credit, and for some communities, it will as well. We have lots of training to help you understand this change. So if you go to crsresources.org and get over into the training and videos tab, you can download a recorded webinar that speaks just to the Class 9 and Activity 310. And then we have a new set of elevation certificate videos to help you understand how to review and how to correct. And they're even useful for people who are filling them out in the first place too. So share the availability of those resources with people in your community if you're not the person who takes in ECs. But the biggest point of the change of the Class 9 prerequisites is check certificates when you receive them. Communities have relied on the courtesy visits that CRS gives certificates and then makes corrections. You really should be making corrections first to make that 90% correctness rate by your second review. So we have on CRS resources the elevation certificate checklist that you should download. And we also have a template for that construction certificate management procedures. So a template to help you meet the prerequisite and to get those credits. Again, visit the videos and learn more. And then a new prerequisite for the CRS program came via the addendum, and that is for the Class 8 freeboard for residential structures. So this is the wording that's in the manual. So at least 1 foot of freeboard, but this is a good opportunity for communities who have had a foot of freeboard for a long time to maybe think about 2 or 3 feet of freeboard. It does include the machinery and equipment that it goes with the building that's owned by the building. We do mean all residential buildings for substantial improvement, substantial damage as well, where we have base flood elevations that are either shown on a firm or in a flood insurance study. And we do mean the BFEs that are associated with AO and AH zones. This new prerequisite, and really some of the impetus for even having the addendum is right here, is for the importance of the reduced damage that comes with freeboard, the increased community resiliency, and the very important aspect that flood insurance premiums are lower when you have freeboard. that will continue to be supported with risk rating 2.0, that the higher the building is from the ground, the lower the rates. But to help prove the point, our good friends at ASFPM put together a trifold brochure that you can download at floods.org. And they work with the folks at FEMA Building Sciences and FEMA Underwriting to take a look at what's the cost of elevating an additional foot. Not the cost to elevate to the BFE, but going a foot beyond. And this circled table here shows the difference based on different construction techniques. And then when you take a look at the reduced insurance premiums for being rated higher as a building or as the first floor of the building, then there are different times that that increased cost of going up a foot is recuperated, redeemed in lower flood insurance premiums. And so the example that they give on this page of the brochure is stem wall construction. And within 3.3 years in your premium savings, you've recouped the cost to go higher. So it simply just makes sense to have homeowners and builders just build higher. Think of the savings over the full life of a 30-year mortgage. Think of the savings when it comes time to sell that building to a person who might have a new mortgage as well. So thanks to our friends at ASFPM for helping. And then to point out, the Class 8 freeboard prerequisite is effective at your next cycle visit or the next manual. We don't know exactly when the next manual will be, but definitely at your next cycle visit. But we hope communities will be considering adopting freeboard if they don't already have it much sooner. We've published some frequently asked questions that are available at crsresources.org that you can download. We have a couple of questions that have kind of continued since we issued the FAQs, so I'm going to touch on just two important things. And some of these we will touch on in upcoming NFIP CRS update newsletters. But the first one is attached garages. How do we ensure that what we require for attached garages meets the Class 8 freeboard prerequisite? Well, what we have said is that as long as your machinery and equipment within an attached garage is elevated to at least BFE +1, then we'll accept the minimum NFIP requirements for attached garages. So in sketch number 1, that home would be non-compliant and it would also be minus rated because the garage floor is below the BFE and there are not the required openings. Sketch number 2 still has a floor below the BFE, but there are the required openings. So that home would be rated at BFE +1 and would meet the Class 8 freeboard prerequisites. We have all the other sketches there, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, to kind of demonstrate what might be a different state requirement that you have. I think sketch number 4 is the state of Florida. Other municipalities might have other scenarios, so we included all those sketches. We'll be sharing this with you in the next CRS newsletter because our past CRS newsletter, the most recent one, was quite lengthy and something just had to wait a little bit. Another thing that's confused people is an exception that we've given for certain kinds of equipment and for utility meters. So many of you implement your freeboard through your building code. And if you look at the I codes, the the International Residential Code, it does talk about that machinery and equipment needs to be elevated to your flood protection elevation. And then there's a very lengthy exceptions paragraph. That exceptions paragraph really says that specially designed equipment does not have to be elevated. But to better understand this, rather than dissect the building code, we're leaning on FEMA publication P-348, which talks about utility systems. And if you go to table 3-1 within that publication, it gives details of what's allowed for residential buildings and what's allowed for non-residential buildings. And you'll get more information on understanding that IRC exception. For utility meters, because some communities or utility companies or whoever the meter owner is may have height maximums that maybe they can't be more than 5 feet off the ground so the meter can be read because they might not be owned by the homeowner. We have said that they do not need to meet the Class 8 freeboard prerequisite. They can be placed at whatever level the community or the utility company requires them to be. There may be instances where a surveyor is going to catch that utility meter elevation and it appears on the EC that it's non-compliant, that it didn't meet our freeboard prerequisite. This ISO resource specialist will work with you to make sure that we're not penalizing you or not considering those correct ECs for utility meters. Again, you can go to the webinars and our other training to learn more about that. So that's the two new prerequisites, the Class 9 prerequisite changes and the new Class 8. So then in the addendum, we offer several new credit opportunities. Some are new ways to get current credit and others are brand new credits. And so first is the floodplain species assessment and floodplain species plans. I'll say no more about that because the very next session is French Wetmore talking about details to that credit. You can go to crsresources.org to get more information and all the documents that he's going to be talking about. And then Bill noted the substantial damage management plan credit that we're offering. This is up to 140 points. So those of you who are big CRS experts know that that's the same kind of credit for a repetitive loss area analysis in RLAA. I won't say more about that because we have a webinar coming up on May 19th. Please join us for that. And the guidance document for the substantial damage management plan credit is also forthcoming, and we'll get that on CRS resources when the time comes. Other opportunities are through the flood insurance promotion credit that we have in Activity 370. We want to incentivize communities, regional groups, other stakeholders to help us promote flood insurance. We certainly through the CRS want to see FEMA reach their goals and meet what they have in the strategic plan, the goals and objectives for closing the insurance gap. We're trying to simplify other aspects, and one simplification we hope we're achieving is in Activity 450 with stormwater management plans, and the SMR credit impact adjustment has been simplified. Most communities should see an increase in credit because of this, but we have also reduced the documentation that needs to go with some of the Activity 450 credits. In 610, we've got just some new ways to begin getting credit for emergency operations plans that support that need to look at substantial damage after a flood or other hazard event. And then we've updated our sea level rise numbers, and we've also offered some prorating credit opportunity for communities when they can't do or haven't done their sea level rise planning out to the year 2100. And those are all explained in the addendum. So that's it for the addendum, some new prerequisites with some new opportunities and ideally some simplifications and hopefully an easy to follow and easy to read document. Again, don't forget to go to FEMA.gov, that vanity URL, community-rating-system and CRS.org for more information. And with that, I will turn it over to Sherry Harper. Sherry.
Thank you, Molly. Good morning, everyone. Next slide. 2021 is going to be a very, very busy year for ISO. It looks like it's shaping up so that we'll have between 260 and 280 cycle visits this year. For all of you who are not cycling this year, you will continue to do your annual recertification. You will remain on the same quarterly system that we've had since 2017, so no timing changes for you. One change that did occur this year, though, is we are separating the elevation certificate review, or the certificate review rather, from the cycle process. So during your annual recertification time period, every year we will be looking at your elevation certificates and the other certificates that go along with your construction program. We have had many staffing changes at ISO this year. We've had a couple of retirements that were not anticipated. They were surprised, but we're very happy for those individuals. And we've had two very important promotions. Garrett Bima and Michelle Olivier have both been promoted to technical coordinator positions. Now, their positions do remain open at this time, and we are recruiting for their replacements. But please don't be concerned. We will be filling those positions in short order. and we are always available to assist you if you do have any questions. Both Garrett and Michelle will continue servicing their areas, and we as a team will all cover the vacancies for the entire country until those positions are filled. If your ISO specialist is not available for you right now, you can go to crsresources.org. You will find there the contact information for our entire team, and please feel free to reach out to any team member that you may have. We do continue to offer technical assistance and courtesy reviews. So if you want someone in particular to look at your floodplain management plan or any watershed management plans, you can reach out to your technical coordinators and we will get you into the hands of the right person to do the courtesy reviews of any item that you wish. Next slide, Molly. We do have a myriad of training opportunities for you. Now, it is unfortunate that due to COVID-19 in 2020, we were not able to offer the 4-day EMI courses or the 4-day field deployed courses. We do hope to have those back online in 2022. We did, however, have the opportunity to take our 2-day field deployed course and turn it into a virtual training opportunity. If you are interested in any of the 2-day courses that we have, please reach out to your state NFIP coordinator or your FEMA regional coordinator, and we'll get those on the books for you just as soon as we can. We try to offer 4 to 6 of those per year, but with the 4-day EMI and field deployed courses temporarily on hold due to COVID, we are able to offer more of those training opportunities. So please do reach out. We're happy to provide those at your convenience. We do continue to offer the CRS webinar series. Those are offered on the 3rd Tuesday and Wednesday of every month. We rotate the topics of interest during those webinars. So if you happen to miss one, just look at the upcoming calendar and you'll probably see that it'll be coming back around in fairly short order. We are adding on a continuous basis to our webinar series. So hopefully you'll see some new topics there in short order as well. Thank you to our CRS users group. It's a very special call out to those. During COVID and all the disruption that COVID has had to us as a CRS program and you as a participant in CRS, the users groups have remained steadfast. That forum has been particularly useful in maintaining contact with your coworkers, with your peers, and with your ISO field reps. If you haven't already done so as a CRS users group, please reach out to your ISO field rep. We are very happy to service those and provide some technical assistance and attend those meetings as time permits. We also have our NFIP CRS update newsletter that comes out every 2 months. If you're not on that mailing list, I encourage you to go ahead and sign up to get on that mailing list or that distribution list. You can sign up for the NFIP CRS newsletter at nfipcrs@iso.com. Amanda Gowans manages that inbox, and she'll be happy to get you on the list to get that newsletter. For the ASFPM this week, if you're interested in one-on-ones, we are offering those the same as if we were there in person. We are able to do breakout rooms and do those virtually this year. Again, contact Amanda at the NFIP CRS address on your screen, and Amanda will get you scheduled with one of our technical coordinators or staff members who are providing the one-on-ones this week. Next slide, Molly. So during the course of this morning's presentation, Bill has talked about highlights of the program and some different opportunities coming up. Molly has talked about the 2021 addendum, some new credit opportunities, and some new program requirements that have come about. And I've talked to you about CRS visits and training and upcoming opportunities. Thank you again for attending this morning. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions that you may have.
Hi, thanks so much, Bill, Molly, and Sherry for that great presentation that really walked us through some of the changes that we're seeing in the 2021 addendum. We've had a good bit of questions that have come through, and thankfully, as you know, we're getting more comfortable with this platform, we've been able to get some replies to some of those questions, but certainly want to give you a few minutes to address a few of them. There's been several questions that kind of looked at the freeboard requirement that's coming with this addendum, and maybe, you know, Molly, Bill, Sherry, y'all can clarify how that works in unnumbered A zones, how that works in the various zones. And so just turn it over to you guys for that.
Molly, why don't you handle that if you could?
Sure, I'll take that one. Yes, the freeboard prerequisite is for all numbered zones, for residential buildings in numbered zones. So AO and H zones, if the elevation is 0, 1, 2, we want you to add a foot to that, at least a foot to freeboard there. Unnumbered A zones are not required to have the freeboard requirement at the Class 8 prerequisite. That doesn't come until Class 4 communities. So no requirement to do a BFE determination in unnumbered zones with the Class 8 freeboard prerequisite. So just numbered zones that include AO and AH zones. Thanks.
Great, that's really helpful because we had a lot of questions for that. There was a few kind of questions as you went through the elevation certificate changes. So if you just want to real quick highlight that change from EC to construction certificate and kind of clarify that for some of the viewers.
Right. We made that change because we realized that for some development in the SFHA, it's in for non-residential is the example. It might not be an elevation certificate that's provided. It's a floodproofing certificate. And for V zones, we also need a V zone certificate. So we just wanted to be clear that all of those certificates need to be collected and checked and maintained for the CRS. So that's the family of certificates, not just ECs, but V zone, floodproofing, opening certificates. All of those are our family of construction certificates that need to be collected, maintained, and checked and turned in for review at recertification time.
Also just wanted to alert the viewers that through your presentation, ASFPM, you mentioned an ASFPM product, a document, and then Mary with ASFPM thankfully put a link to that document. So if users want to view that, they can check that out there and download it. I was excited to see that. And then there was also a question if it would be updated. You know, it's with risk rating 2.0 and also with current today's building cost. And so we may, I'm not sure if you guys have that answer, but we may have to send that over back to ASFPM to see if they plan to update it. Let's see. A new question that just came up for the training classes that are offered. Who should I contact?
You would contact Amanda Gowans at amanda.gowans@veris.com for the training courses. She can give you the current schedule.
Or keep tabs on the newsletter, and you can also ask those questions through the crsresources.org questions box too, and those all get to Amanda, and she'll get back to you.
Okay, great.
And Michelle, we had some questions about losses avoided. I'd be happy to respond to.
Sure.
Yeah, some early questions that came in. Thanks, Michelle. The CRS would very much like to know from communities that feel that you have identifiable losses that you have avoided. Certainly after major floods, that would be a great time to see that that if because of your practices, your best practices, your CRS activities, you've avoided some losses. That's the sort of thing we're trying to look into. We have a new committee on the CRS task force to try and help shape some of our direction on this. This is new. There's no model, but sometimes stories are the best source of information, and we turn to the communities to give us some of that input. So hopefully we'll hear more from you on that in the future.
Yeah, there was and I don't want to take too much time, but I think this is a good kind of ending question that kind of talks about a lot of the different changes that we're seeing happening. is there any planned materials for the individuals that are currently, a preferred rate policy holder who may now in the future receive CRS discounts under risk rating 2.0 that it's going to, so just maybe if you had an idea of what new informational materials that may be planned.
I would suggest attend the risk rating 2.0 sessions this week. Some of the folks that are providing those sessions will have more details than we have right now.
Okay. One last question, because I just had somebody mention that there was like 20 likes on a question about the repetitive lost property information, like the disconnect that it seems to be in getting that information, getting properties updated once they've been mitigated. Are there any updates to that?
That's a really good question, Michelle. I don't have time to get into it right now, but I will be at the floodplain management booth at the end of the day today. I look forward to talking to anyone about that topic there. It's an evolving sort of solution, and I'd be happy to speak with someone then. That might be the best option.
So when would that be? There's like a planned session for?
No, this would be my division's floodplain management booth is part of the exhibits this week at ASFPM, and I'll be there at the end of the day to be available.
Okay, so definitely that's a great segue to checking out the booths and making sure that you're getting the full experience from the conference here, even though it's virtual. That gives you the ability to either one-on-one or as a group answer some of these questions a little bit more. So please check that out with Bill later. So we will go ahead and move on to our final presentation of this session, which further just kind of digs in a little bit deeper to some of the addendum changes and things that we're seeing. New CRS credits for conservation and recovery with threatened and endangered species. So once again, we've got two presenters that are been with the CRS program for years and excited to have them giving us this update for this new CRS credit. We've got French Wetmore, who's the president of French and Associates. He's been working with FEMA for many years, but specifically in this new effort to find ways through the CRS program to promote conservation and recovery of threatened and endangered species. And then we have Brett Gates, who is currently the National NFIP Endangered Species Assessment Coordinator. Previously, he worked as the program manager for the CAP-SASE program. He was also the national coordinator for the CRS program and also was a program lead for PDM and FMA programs. So excited to have their wealth of knowledge giving us some updated information with the threatened and endangered species.
Credits for conservation and recovery of threatened and endangered species. Next slide. So I want to highlight the consultation that FEMA did working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service under the Endangered Species Act, which is to recover and therefore prevent the extinction of listed plants and animals and to protect the ecosystems on which they depend. Next slide. ESA Section 7A1 says, all other federal agencies shall, in consultation with and with the assistance of the Secretary, utilize their authorities and furtherance of the purposes of this act by carrying out programs for the conservation of endangered species and threatened species listed pursuant to Section 4 of the Act. So the Act emphasizes that agencies should utilize their existing authorities. And despite the strong proactive conservation mandate, Section 7A1 is widely considered an underutilized and often overlooked tool for ESA listed species conservation and recovery. The 7A1 consultation process is different in many ways than the Section 7A2 process in that there are no regulatory timelines. Often it's less contentious, and definitely it's more collaborative. FEMA formed an interagency work group called the NFIP ESA Section 7A1 Work Group, including representation, again, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service. The goal of the work group was to help FEMA within its authorities to further the efforts of the Endangered Species Act. The interagency work group put great effort into exploring and developing approaches to better incorporate conservation of species into the NFIP. Next slide. The work group looked at various aspects of the NFIP and decided to focus its attention on the Community Rating System, or CRS. FEMA's new Conservation Action Program identifies 3 key components: building awareness through a conservation website, helping with identification using the FRESH mapping tool, and promoting existing incentives and creating new incentives for species and habitat conservation using the community rating system. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about the conservation website, and then French will come in with talk about FRESH and CRS credits. Next slide. FEMA developed the NFIP Floodplains and Wildlife Conservation website to provide ESA education and awareness to NFIP participating communities about opportunities for reducing flood risk and lowering flood insurance premiums, while also conserving habitat essential for ESA-listed threatened and endangered species. The website can be found on FEMA.gov at the website listed on this slide. The website includes multiple web pages and provides background information as to why it is important to protect natural floodplains, and also includes examples from communities around the country. The website also includes information on insurance costs and how to reduce them through the CRS. Next slide. The website provides information for NFIP participating communities and project proponents on the benefits of protecting natural floodplain functions, which often include habitat protection for ESA-listed species and designated critical habitat. The website contains tools and research to assist communities to incorporate species and habitat conservation into floodplain management strategies and decisions. This conveys FEMA's message that it is not an either-or equation. Conserving species and their habitat leads to overall community flood risk reduction. And now I'll turn it over to French, who will explain the second and third components of the Conservation Action Program. And we'll also talk about identification of species and habitat through the FRESH tool and how CRS communities can gain points for conservation of species and habitat. French?
Thank you, Brett. So FRESH, as you might guess, is an acronym. It stands for the Flood Risk and Endangered Species Habitat Mapping Tool. It is found on FEMA's website. You go to the Floodplains and Wildlife Conservation site that Brett just described. In the menu is FRESH Mapping Tool. And when you get to that site, there is the link to the FRESH map. Before you go to that link, though, we recommend that you scroll down and download the user's guide. It's only 9 pages, but you'll find that it's most helpful to get what you need out of this system. So when you go to the site, you put in the name of your community and it'll take you to that general area. Then you outline your area of interest, which is normally your community boundaries, your county boundaries or city limits. And the first thing you want to find out is, are there any threatened and endangered species with range in your community? So range is a technical term that means the likelihood of the species being there. They are felt to be there, could have been there when the species was first listed, which in some cases may have been 40 years ago. So this is just the start. You look for the range and follow those instructions in the user's guide, and you will get a list of the species that have range in your community. For Gloucester County, Virginia, there are 8 species with range. Note the first one, called the sensitive joint vetch. Note also that one of the species is proposed for being listed as threatened. So the FRESH includes not just those already listed, but those proposed, which is an involved process that means very likely the species will end up on the list. The next thing you want to check is whether there is any critical habitat in your community. And critical habitat is defined here. It's pretty darn important sites. These specific areas have been listed in the Federal Register as important for that particular species. So I'm going to show you the critical habitat for the Atlantic sturgeon for Gloucester County. You have to look carefully because when I click the next slide, you'll see lines appear. So I'm going to go back and then you can see that again. And that is how critical habitat for aquatic species are typically shown along the center line of a stream. So let's drill down and look a little closer in Gloucester County, in particular this area, which is on the York River. And let's see what we can find out about that site. You remember the sensitive joint vetch that I mentioned earlier. You can see from the picture that it likes water. And you can therefore assume we might be able to find these close to the York River. So many of the species that are listed have range that are county-wide or even statewide, but some species have been mapped, have their range mapped in more specific areas. And so we ask Fresh, can you give me the map of the range of the sensitive joint vetch? And this is what you get. And lo and behold, it does seem to concentrate close to the water. It is not county-wide like many others are. Another thing Fresh can do is show you where the floodplain is because it's linked to the National Flood Hazard Layer. So here we ask for a map of the floodplain, the special flood hazard area for Gloucester County, and it shows up as light blue and the shaded X zone shows up as brown. And Fresh is really cool. It can do both at the same time. So you ask for the sensitive joint vetch and the special flood hazard area. And you can really see here, really clearly shows the relationship between the habitat for this threatened species and your special flood hazard area. And what that tells you is that your floodplain management program can have a direct impact on this threatened species. Again, I get a hold of that guide, that 9-pager, because it'll tell you how you can do those things that I did with just a click of a button. So that's the second component. It tells you where the species could be located and where their critical habitat are. The third component is the CRS credit. So this is what you would get as an incentive to do something with that information. There are 2 new credits in the 2021 addendum. They are both found on the Activity 510, Floodplain Management Planning, and the element of Natural Floodplain Functions Plan. The first new element is called a Floodplain Species Assessment, and the other one is a Floodplain Species Plan. They go hand in hand. If you want credit for the plan, you have to do the assessment first. You can do the assessment and not proceed with the plan and still get some points. The points are 15 points for the assessment, 85 points for the full-fledged plan, and a total of 100 points, which is the max possible under natural floodplain function plans. Now, in the addendum, there's about 2 pages devoted to these topics, and that's not a lot of guidance to tell you what you need to do. So you can also download from our CRS resources website a 20-page guidance that you can see here. And at the same site, you can download what is probably even more helpful is 3 plans and assessments done by 4 communities around the country. All 4 of them have species listed by both Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries. And they're really great examples. They all look a little different, but they should be very helpful to tell you how 1 or 2 things could look in what you're doing. The guidance gives you in the table of contents the step-by-step process. Like all other CRS credited plans, it's the process. CRS needs to know that you went through the right process, and the actual outcome of what you end up selecting isn't as important as knowing that you went through the right process to get there. As I said, you had to do the assessment first. That's the first 6 steps. Let me walk you through those quickly, and then we can talk about the plan. So step 1 is to identify the species that could be in your community, which is another way of saying what communities have range in my, what species have range in my community. And you've already seen how you can do that with FRESH. In fact, the first several steps depend on FRESH, and it's really the quickest and easiest way to do those steps. So step one is come up with the listing of those species. Step two is to identify their range and critical habitat and compare that with the floodplain. And again, you saw how we did that earlier for the sensitive joint vetch in Gloucester County. So these two steps tell you probably stuff you didn't know before about the variety of threatened and endangered species that could be in your community. Step three is for you to evaluate or assess your own CRS activities. What are you doing in the CRS, and what things could you do that might impact those species and their recovery? So there is a new section in the addendum that lists more than just activities that have natural floodplain function benefits, but activities that can be directly related to conservation and recovery of threatened and endangered species. And so take a look through that. It gives you an idea of where those credits are. You'll probably realize you're already getting credit under several of them. But in the guidance, there is a table of the 19 activities that have been identified as potentially helping threatened and endangered species. And what you would do under step three is review each one and be able to answer the question, are you doing that activity? If so, are you getting credit for it? And if not, is it feasible to get credit? Or if you are doing it, could you get more points? And you'll notice you're probably getting a lot of credit. And this is the example from St. Tammany Parish. And under this one, you have this code of number 2. Well, a lot of communities will put down what this is, and that is, yes, we're doing outreach projects. Yes, we're doing messages on natural floodplain functions, but no, they aren't directly related to the threatened and endangered species in our community. So we are getting credit, but qualified. And yes, we could do the right thing if we change the messages. So that's an assessment. And in the examples, we found the communities each wrote about a paragraph on each of these activities. Exactly what are they doing and what do these codes mean? So step 3 gives you a good feel for what could be done and what you are already doing to help with the conservation and recovery. Step 4 is to find out who else is interested in those species. And so you need to identify other organizations. At a minimum, you must identify who are the key offices in these 4 agencies, the 2 services. Every FEMA region has either an environmental office or in some cases, somebody specifically assigned to work on threatened and endangered species. And every state has an equivalent agency for fish and wildlife protection. The guidance shows you how to find the websites and get the contact information for those species. And then you need to look at who do you have locally that would also be interested. Do you have conservation districts or offices in other governmental agencies? Are there any private organizations that focus on a specific species like the National Audubon Society or Save the Manatees? And you probably know those already. They're probably folks that come to council meetings and talk about their concerns. And some of them also are focusing on open space preservation, like say the Nature Conservancy. So step 4 is to find out who all these folks are to get you ready for step 5. Step 5 is to send what you've drafted so far, your steps 1, 2, and 3 work on the species and your CRS work, and get them out to these folks and ask for comments. While you're at it, we also recommend that you send what you've done so far to your ISO CRS specialist for what's called a courtesy review. So this doesn't get scored, it's just a review to see if what you've done is on the right track. The specialists around the country will send your questions and your documents to be reviewed to one central person who does the review of this activity. And that happens to be me for the next year or two. And so I can assure you, please send anything in, even if you're just starting or you've got a question. This is a brand new credit, and we want to make sure folks are going to understand it, that what we've written for guidance is correct, and anything we can do to help you get started on this. So when you get your feedback from these folks, take a look at the comments and recommendations. I'm going to use Monroe, City of Monroe, Washington, to what happened when they got their feedback. So they had 11 species, as you can see, and the comments they got were, well, if you look at the lynx and the wolf, you're a city, a relatively small town, and those species are not going to be found in a built-up metropolitan area. They just simply avoid people. So if we were you, we would not recommend spending time on activities for protecting those species that aren't going to be found. Next example is the marbled murrelet. They got feedback from folks like the Audubon Society that they live in one of two places. They spend part of their year in old growth forest, and you don't have any old growth forest inside your city limits. And they spend the rest of the year on salt water, and you're 20 miles upriver of Puget Sound. So even though it's a county-wide range and you found it under using fresh, we really recommend focusing on the others. So the end result is trimming down the list that they started with to a much more meaningful list. In Monroe's case, there's 4 fish identified by both of the services. And so Monroe was able to really focus on things they could do along not just the rivers, but along the shorelines, and for stormwater runoff activities that could help with these species. So at the end of step 6, at the end of this assessment, you come to step 6, which is finish up the draft, send it into your governing body, send a copy to the folks who gave you comments and give them a thank you, and then get it to your specialist, because that's what you need to do to prepare an assessment, and you should be able to get 15 points for that. The big question you should ask now is, do you want to prepare a full-fledged plan? There's more credit there. And should you prepare a plan? So the plan, if you go back to the contents, it also has the step-by-step process. I'm not going to do it step-by-step or review the details, but I want to tell you about 2 key parts. The first is you do need to do some homework on the species. And lucky for you, the services have prepared recovery plans for just about every species that's listed. And the recovery plans can give you good information on their habitat, what are the threats facing them, and specifically recovery tasks. What are things people should be doing to help these species recover? And you can go through the tasks. There may be 20, 30, 40 different things, and pick out what can I as a city government or county government do to which tasks are appropriate for us. And then you'll end up, after you do all the steps, with a list of tasks. And as with all CRS credited plans, you need to say, what are you going to do? Who's going to do it? When's it got to be done by? If you need money, how much? Where's it going to come from? And who can help you? So you end up with a real specific plan that does need to be adopted by your governing body, and again, sent in for approval for credit. So if you go through both of those elements, you'll end up with 100 points, and that's not hay in the CRS. So those are the new elements, the new credits. We also introduced you to the information in the first component that can help you. It's on the FEMA website. Fresh, which can help you identify species locations. And those 2 can be found by going into this FEMA website. And then we also covered the assessment and the planning, and the guidance for that, plus the examples, are on CRS resources. So with that, we'll ask for questions.
French and Brett, definitely want to thank you for that presentation. That was informative about the threatened and endangered species and how this kind of works with new CRS points that we could gather in the program. There's been a few questions that are in the chat box, and we'll go through a few of them, and some of them may have had an answer already, but we'll bring up so that everyone can kind of hear it. How does the protection of endangered species help to reduce risk of flooding?
So generally, when we're protecting species, conserving species and critical habitat, we're talking about extra regulations. We're talking about open space. We're talking about, low density zoning, whatever, all of these things that would help, protect the species and their habitat, as well as enhance the natural and beneficial functions of floodplains. All of these things end up reducing flood losses in general.
Okay. French, did you have any comments on that one before we go on to another one?
There's an old saying that the only good floodplain is a vacant floodplain from a floodplain manager's perspective. And protecting endangered species is definitely a motivation to keep some floodplains vacant. Plus they have additional benefits to society, those particular areas. So it does really help reduce flood losses.
Okay. And then there was a question that came through about the various tools that you mentioned through the presentation, where people can find them, if tools are accepted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So if you just kind of wanted to maybe elaborate a little bit on where people can find these tools.
I think the key tool is FRESH, and that is fine. Go to FEMA.gov, type in conservation, and you'll get up to the right website and find FRESH and the user's guide, which is also on the same website. Those are for information only. They are not any kind of regulatory tools. They can give you additional information from the 2 services sites on things that can help you. But they are a FEMA thing that anybody can use them. You don't have to be in CRS. Anybody interested in the subject matter can use them, and they're quite helpful. But they are, correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but they're a FEMA, for FEMA use, for FEMA programs is why they were created, not to have any regulatory authority.
Correct. Right. These are non-regulatory, just helpful hints and processes and conservation ideas. And there's several examples up on the conservation website from National Marine Fisheries and from Fish and Wildlife to help kind of direct folks and what they need to consider when developing near or around species and floodplains.
So one of the commenters had more of a comment than a question, but they said they would like to see the slide with the sample plan again. I know we can't go back and show a slide right now with the way that things are recorded, but could you maybe guide them to where they can find information about a sample plan?
So at crsresources.org, which everybody in the CRS should be very familiar with, in the 500 series, which is where the credit is, are the 3 plans and the 3 example plans, and they are just link them and download them. They're not that big.
Great. I found this to be an interesting question too. If a community does not have endangered species, does the assessment proving that get points?
We've kicked that around. We haven't found that community yet, but we've kicked it around. And if the community walks through the assessment and ends up concluding that there were no federally listed species and follows the process, they can get credit for the assessment. But if they have no species, they can't get a plan. Now, what they can do is identify state listed species, talk to the other organizations and folks that they should be coordinating with during their assessment. And if they end up with species from those lists, they can proceed and do a plan for conservation of them.
Okay. I had one new one come in, and then that's probably all that we have time for. Can a community get credit for existing programs and policies, or must these be new actions?
In theory, if they've gone through the same kind of process, they could get the credit for it. And there's also credit under that same element, natural floodplain planning, that also has a lot of flexibility for crediting local plans related to protecting species. So in theory, it could do it, but it's probably the assessment itself is not that long a process, and I would recommend taking a new look at what might be listed since they've done their previous work. Walk through the assessment. I'll suspect when they did something previously, they did not do a thorough review of their CRS credits, because that's kind of new. And I think they'll learn something and therefore be sure to get the credit.
One question that just keeps getting promoted to the top more and more is, can the fresh map be used to double check that no endangered species are in the area? Because there's a place on the LOMAR form that the floodplain manager needs to attest to that. Do you know if the fresh map can be used to double check this?
No, we do not recommend the fresh map used for that. It's for conservation purposes only and for access to the CRS activity. When in doubt, it's a great place to start, but when in doubt, we even say in fresh that make sure you go to whichever service that applies, either NOAA Fisheries or to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they have an IPAC session. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has IPAC, a online system where you can see what species are in your area. Even though that data directly feeds into ours, we are not there. The official database. It's really for information only.
All right. And we'll end with a recent question said, Brett, is your background from? It just jumped away from me. The question disappeared. Where is your background sign from?
Oh, that's Monroe County. The sign is telling people that the key deer, endangered species, in the Florida Keys, and that you're entering that zone, and to slow down because cars, I think, are one of the number one threats to them, as well as, of course, development.
Nice. And how can people get in touch with you if they have specific questions? Would that be through CRS resources, or is there another way for people to reach out?
Yeah, we really encourage folks sending their drafts through, and if they have any questions, but go through your ISO specialist. They'll do all the processing, and it won't take long to get a direct phone call. So, but use the process, the procedure.
And when in doubt, if there are other general questions on our 7A1 conservation program, other things on our website, there's an email address. It's FEMA NFIP ESA at FEMA-DHS.gov. You'll have to go to the site and get the right hyphens and things. But if you have other general questions that are not specific to FSA or FSP, the new CRS credits, you can ask us there, and that'll come to me and several folks at FEMA.
All right, so that's all that we have time for today on this session. Certainly check out the various booths that are through the exhibitor hall that you may be able to interact with the speakers again if you have further questions. And thanks everybody for coming to our session.